welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to share with you a comparison of all the eyeshadow palettes that I've reviewed on my channel in probably like the past 2 or 3 months. If I haven't done like dedicated videos on these palettes, I've included them in certain videos. And there's just been a lot of palettes. I always get questions of whether or not you should buy the palette I'm reviewing or a different palette. So I wanted to put all the palettes together in one video, give you guys some comparisons, let you know my favorites, my least favorites, and everything in between. So if you guys want to see a comparison of all the eyeshadow palettes that I've purchased or received in the past like 3 months, then just keep on watching. I have the Pat McGrath Mothership Sublime Bronze Ambition palette. So Pat McGrath came out with, I believe, 3 palettes that are this size for $55. They come with 6 pans around the beginning of March. And this is the only Pat McGrath product that I own, and I was not originally interested in this palette, but I just swatched it at Sephora and I was pretty impressed with it, so I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I bought it during the VIB sale. And I don't necessarily regret buying it because it's a good palette for sure. The quality is very pretty, but really there's just like one matte shade and a ton of shimmers, and I'm totally usually okay with that because I carry my shimmers like up to my crease. I can do with just one matte, but even saying that, I usually don't because even though I love shimmers, I don't feel like these are super versatile and different from each other to make it worth $55. I'll just give you guys a couple swatches. They do swatch super pretty, but they're not anything like we haven't seen before, basically. It still feels like a high-end palette, but for $55 for very similar shimmer shades, I just wish there was more variety, and I wish I thought that through when I bought it, because obviously I could look at it and know that they're all kind of bronze, but I don't really get very inspired by this palette. It is pretty, the quality is good, but that's basically all it has to it, and for $55, I kind of want a little bit more than that. And then we're gonna move into some of the Too Faced palettes that I think are really awesome. I'm really surprised by. So Too Faced just re-released their new, or their older natural palettes, the Natural Matte and the Natural Eyes. I bought this one, the Natural Eyes, and then Too Faced actually sent me the Natural Matte. I was totally not interested in this one, so I'm like, I just really want this one too, so I'm gonna buy this one. But this one ended up being my favorite of both of them, and the Natural Matte, this is my favorite matte palette in my collection, and I'm not a big like matte eyeshadow person. Like I'll use 1 or 2 mattes with an eye look, but I never do like full-on matte looks. But I love this palette. This is my favorite like transition shade palette, and I used to say that about the Too Faced Just Peachy Mattes. I still feel that way about it, but I have not touched that since I got this palette. And I'll show you guys just a couple swatches of some of my favorite shades, and I also love that there's warm tones and you also get like some cool tones in there too. So they're just like very creamy, very blendable, very pigmented shades. And I do wish that there wasn't so many big nude shades right here. Like I just use this one to set my eye, and then I guess you could use these for the lid, but I do feel like these are a little too similar to each other. I would have rather seen a lot more deeper mattes and just a little bit more variety. But I love this palette because you get some neutrals, you get some warm tones, the quality is awesome. It is really blendable, very pigmented. And then the Natural Eyes, I actually, I'm okay with this one. It's a good palette, but I like to use it in combination with this. I don't really like it on its own, but the quality is awesome. It's just the color suction that I'm just not like a big cool tone neutral person, and this is totally like a cool tone neutral lovers palette. And this is actually one of my favorite golds of all time from Too Faced. They have this in a couple different palettes that they've come out with over the years. Honey Pot, it's such a gorgeous gold. It's just like a true gold that's not too yellow. But then a lot of the other shades in here, like I like, and I love using Chocolate Martini. I really love brown, deeper colors that have a glitter to them for my outer corner. I don't like to do mattes on my outer corner. I just love a little bit of a shimmer. I just love playing with a little bit more shimmer on my outer corner just to make my eyes look bigger. But the other shades I'm just like okay with. I'm not like overwhelmed by them in a good way or even in a bad way. It's a good palette, the quality is awesome, but I'm just like a very warm tone person. But if you like more neutral and cool tones, you're gonna like this palette. And that's why I like mixing it with this one, because this has my warm mattes and then all the mattes in here are a little bit more cool. So definitely the quality of the Natural Eyes palette is awesome. No complaints about that. It's just the shades in here are really, it's just a personal preference. I'm not into like super cool tones. And it's another palette that I bought. I saw that there is more cool tone shades in it, but I still bought it anyways. I always think that I'm gonna like change up my style, but then I just go back to like my comfort zone. And the next one I'm gonna talk about is the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. Now I did a video comparing this to the Modern Renaissance. All of the reviews and tutorials I've done, I'll put in a playlist and I'll link it below for you guys if you want like a lot of detail with like swatches of absolutely everything. But I love this palette so much. I will say that this is not as like everyday as the Modern Renaissance to me. I find that the Modern Renaissance has a little bit more of those like subtle shades, like more like work appropriate kind of shades. And this is more of like my nighttime palette, or just like living my life kind of palette. This isn't my like everyday 10-minute makeup kind of palette. You can do that, but because the shimmers in here are so pigmented, especially the ones that I like to use, like the shade of Bronze is super pigmented, super, super gorgeous. And what else? The shade Sultry, I really like to mix both of those together in eye looks. You're gonna get a lot of intense color payoff with this palette. You do have a couple more subtle shades, but even so, these two shades, let me swatch them for you guys, Glistening and Fairy. So those are Glistening and Fairy. It's still gonna give you a little bit more of a pop compared to some of the lighter shades in the Modern Renaissance palette, in my opinion. So I find that this is a perfect like nighttime summery palette. They are super, super pigmented colors. The mattes in here are incredibly pigmented. They're probably the most pigmented shadows for mattes that I have in my collection. You're also gonna find that it's a very similar quality to the Modern Renaissance palette. And the mattes especially are very soft, just like the Modern Renaissance palette. That's why you're gonna get a lot of color payoff. You're gonna get a little bit of fallout, but not anything like super intense that's gonna ruin your makeup look or anything. Like you could see in Sienna, I've had a significant dent in that one already, and it's not like I use this palette every day. So this palette is $42, but just know that you don't get as much product as like a Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette or like a Urban Decay Naked palette. You get a little bit less, so even though it's like the same price, you don't get as much product. And then next, let's see, this is the Smashbox Vlada Cover Shot palette. This is another one that's kind of like, it's a good palette, but I wouldn't recommend buying this. They sent me the whole collection. This is actually one of my favorite products from the whole collection, and it is good, but that's all it is. It's just a good palette. It's $29. Like the shimmers are gorgeous. Let me swatch a couple for you guys. But with the Cover Shot palettes, like these are gorgeous. Like there's no denying that. It's a really awesome quality. The only thing is you do just get two mattes. You get a light transition shade and more of like a darker transition shade. And that's basically kind of my only complaint. Like if there was like half mattes right here and then the shimmers that are like the most pigmented and vibrant, like these are gonna end up looking pretty similar in this one. Like they're all gonna kind of blend together on the eye. So I wish that there was more mattes so you could get more like different varieties and looks, and even like a peachy matte shade in here would be really nice. So definitely the quality is good, but I think that a lot of the colors are really, really similar, and even with the highlighter tones on top, it's all just gonna kind of blend together. So if you typically apply your makeup with mattes in the crease, a shimmer shade, and like darkening up the outer corner, you're probably gonna get like one solid look with this palette and then one that looks maybe a little bit different, because the shimmers are so similar to each other. If you kind of play with your makeup a little bit differently and are a little bit more creative, you can get obviously more creative looks. But just for like an average makeup user, I think that you're probably not gonna get too much variety with this palette. And then next, let's go into another mini palette. So this is the Natasha Denona Mini Sunset Palette. This was $25. This was the $25 that I wish I have back in my life. I don't know why I didn't return this palette. I think I was like kind of too forgiving of this palette when I purchased it, and I did tell you guys in my review that I didn't really like it. But I still wanted to hang on to it. I think just because I wanted to feel fancy and own Natasha Denona, and I don't have anything else from Natasha Denona. but I totally rather have $25 to like order myself a pizza right now, because I have not touched this palette, I don't think, since my review video. And the reason I didn't really like it, the mattes are fine, but I mean, it's just two medium tone browns, nothing special. And these shimmers are just like really, really stiff. Like they're gonna swatch nice, but when you can see how much I digged my brush into these two shades to try to get that color payoff. And the shadows do look really nice when I swatch them, but when you apply them with a brush, even with Fix Plus, you're gonna need to like really pack them on, and it's just like a bit more effort than what I want with like a really luxury brand. I realize it's only $25, but this is a very, very small eyeshadow palette. Let me show you guys comparison to like the Soft Glam palette of size. So it is a very small palette. This is something where like if I were to dig and use my shadow this aggressively every time that I apply it, and I use it for like a week straight, I'm gonna be hitting pan on a couple shades. So not a big fan of that one. I have other shimmer shades in my collection that I don't need to make work that much. So I do want to try out other Natasha Denona palettes, but that one I would definitely stay away from. So here's another palette that I really don't like, and this is the Urban Decay Back Talk palette. This is $46. They did send this to me when it came out. If I didn't get it sent as PR, I would have ended up just returning it, because I haven't touched it, I don't think, since my review, just because I have these shadows and I have them in such better quality in other palettes, basically. It's not horrendous, it's not awful, it's not like super patchy, but it's just really average. The blushes work really nicely, but I wanted this palette for the eyeshadows, and I really love what they did with like the color scheme, but the shimmers especially are just very like mild. They basically feel like very watered down. They're just a little bit difficult to build up on the eye. So these are all of the shimmers swatched, and they do look pretty nice when you swatch them, but really I would wear like these two shades on my lid for like a go-to lid color, and they are pretty subtle. And even like the deeper tones, these should be like a lot more pigmented for like the deeper shimmer shadows. The mattes are fine. There's actually not too many mattes in the palette. Like this one has a little bit of a shimmer to it. You have a matte brown, a matte kind of mauve shade, and then like a brow bone highlight. So you're not getting anything super special or transformative with the mattes, just kind of like your standard very basic blending shades. It doesn't perform to me like a high-end palette. I think a lot of people agreed on this one that the concept was awesome. I really like the color scheme in here, but the quality just didn't do it for me, and that sucks because I was actually really looking forward to this palette. All right, so next moving into like influencer palettes and collabs, and this one is kind of like in the middle because it's the Huda Beauty Rose Gold Remastered palette, still a palette that's sold at Sephora. This is $65. And I just reviewed this palette. This just came out recently, and this is basically like the upgraded version of her original rose gold textured palette. It's basically like you buy an iPhone and then 6 months later it comes out with the next one that you kind of want more. That's kind of how I feel about it, and I know I didn't buy the original one, so I don't have that like monetary attachment to buying the first palette, but honestly, had I bought the first palette in 2016, I would probably still ended up buying this one now. But this is basically like the same concept, same colors. She really only changed up like 4 to 6 shades. I think like 4 of the shimmers and 1 or 2 of the matte shades from the original palette, but she really did change up the formula. The whole first row was textured, like basically pressed pigments, and then the mattes are supposed to be more blendable in this palette compared to the first one. And honestly, I was a little bit skeptical about this palette because I did buy the Desert Dust palette, and I think I was like trying to convince myself to like and use that palette, but I really don't like that palette. And I kind of regret not returning that palette because I just never really ended up using it too much. It was just like a lot of different textures that I wasn't really a big fan of. I really don't like to make my eyeshadow work. I just want it to work, basically. And I actually really like this palette. I was very on the fence about it because I really didn't like the Desert Dust, and I was hoping it was a lot better quality. And this one definitely is to me. The mattes are a lot more blendable. I found that the Desert Dust palette, the mattes were a little bit drier. These are pretty creamy, and the shimmer shades are awesome in this palette. I love like all the shadows in here. There's maybe 1 or 2 more like chunky shimmer shades, but overall this is like my go-to summer palette. Like super metallic, super foiled. Love the formula, love the pigmentation. Every time I've used this palette, I've been happy with my eye look. I've enjoyed this palette every time that I use it. Sometimes I review eyeshadow palettes and I kind of have to make myself use them for several days when I prefer to use something else in my collection, but this is something that I actually want to reach for and I look forward to using. So overall, I'm just really happy with this palette. I think it is a really great eyeshadow palette. A lot of people, and I said this in my review, compare it to the Soft Glam palette, and I love this palette, so that's kind of why I wanted to get this palette. So if you do like the Soft Glam, or you like the idea of the Soft Glam, then I really like this one too. And I'd say that the shimmers are pretty similar in both palettes. The mattes in the Anastasia Soft Glam are a lot more pigmented, just because this is like one of the most pigmented matte shadows and palettes that I own. But the mattes in here are still very, very pigmented, very creamy, very blendable, very easy to use. Everything just layers very nicely on top of each other. I'm actually pretty impressed with this palette. Like, I was a little hesitant about it, so for me to actually say it's a really good palette, that's how I feel about it. Alright, so next we have the KKW Beauty and Mario palette. This palette is $45. Mine is pretty messy, but this is what it looks like. I love the shimmer shades in this palette. I love the warm tones and the mattes in here. I do wish that there was maybe one more matte in this palette. Like, I could have done without this matte like highlight shade and just done like one more medium tone matte in here. And then I don't love that this silver shade has more of a chunky finish to it, more fallout to it compared to some of the other shades. Like, it's gonna give you more fallout. You really need to build that, but a lot of the other shadows, well, basically all the other shadows are really, really gorgeous. Very, very pigmented, very, very creamy. Overall, I was just very impressed with the quality of this palette. The mattes blend out super easily. The shimmers go on really, really nicely. I do wish that the blue, because it is a pop of color, the blue goes on nicely, but it's not the most intense like blue you'll ever see in your life. Like, it's a little bit more subtle. You do need to build it up quite a bit to actually get it like super, super pigmented. So that's kind of like the one downside, because there's a purple in here too, but it's more of like a neutrally purple, and the blue being like the standout shade in the palette, and she really emphasized that blue shade. I just wish that it was like more of that like vibrant foil shade, because some of the other shimmers perform it that way. But overall, this is a very good quality palette. I think it's reasonable for $45. It does have a mirror to it. I like the sleek packaging too. I do really like to use this palette a lot with my natural matte palette, because it has more of those lighter tone transition shades. So for like everyday looks, the lightest matte transition shade you have is this one right here. And that's kind of like more of a pigmented brown shadow, and then you have like a more orangey brown and then a cool tone brown. So if I don't want to do something like very intense, I want to do like a really quick like 1-2 minute eye look but still use one of the shimmer shades, then I'll go in with the natural matte palette and just use these together. But overall, the quality is awesome. If you like those shades, I think you'll be really impressed with it. Next, I have the Pure BoxyCharm collab. So this was $36. This is available at Ulta. This was such a promising palette. I really don't like it. I got it in BoxyCharm. It came, I think, in everybody's BoxyCharm, I think in March or April. I really love the color scheme in here, but like you guys can see with this shadow, I really, really dug into this palette to make it work and try to get like that pigmentation. And the blue shade in this palette is very like subtle. So like the pops of color aren't really gonna be like very pigmented. It's one of those things where you just really need to build it up and make it work, and that's not worth $36. The mattes really aren't anything special with this palette. Just overall, it has a very underwhelming feel to it. I wouldn't recommend it. I would definitely save your money on that one. There's better palettes out there. That's all I have to say about it. It's just pretty underwhelming. The quality is not that great. And then next we're gonna move into one that the quality is a lot better, that's a lot more affordable, and you do get those pops of color, and that is the Colourpop Perception palette. I really do love Colourpop. I love how affordable they are, but not only that, they have really great quality. So this is $23. It's the collab with Makeup Shayla. The only thing that I don't like, I wish that there was a couple more mattes, because you do get a couple mattes right here and this one. I do just wish that there was a little bit more variety with the mattes, not just like the warm kind of orangey tones. And that way you can use some deeper matte colors with like the blues and the purples in here, and you could do like an all purple look and not just like warm crease and a color. But I kind of go for a warm crease and a color a lot of time, like right now. And that's why I really love this palette. It really works for me really nicely. It has one of my favorite kind of shades, which is called Sassy. I love eyeshadows that are this color. It's just so gorgeous. It just has like a lot of different shades to it. And then some of the other colors, like this one is Diva. Just all of these shimmer shades apply so nicely. You get a lot of color payoff, which I really, really love. The mattes blend out really, really great. I do find that the mattes from Colourpop are just slightly dry. Not anything that's going to give you an issue with blending, but they're not like as creamy as my Too Faced Natural Matte palette. Like those I find super, super soft and creamy. The Colourpop ones are just a little bit drier, but I don't find them to be patchy or anything. So it's not an issue, but it's not like the best mattes that I've ever used in my life. But with the shimmers, I have no issue whatsoever. Just love this palette. I think there's a lot of great shades in here for summer. I just love the overall look of it. I love that there's a lot of variety. You get a mirror with it for $23. It's definitely awesome. And I think this palette is in and out of stock all the time, but once it is restocked, or if it is restocked when I put this video up, definitely try it out if you guys have been wanting to try out Colourpop. If you haven't yet, this is what I would recommend out of all the palettes that I have. I just think you get a lot more variety than some of the other palettes. And then we have another influencer product. This is the Laura Lee Los Angeles Nudie Patootie palette. This palette is huge. This is like the biggest palette I have in my collection. It's the size of my arm. This is a really, really big palette for $45. So the quality is definitely awesome. The mattes blend out so nicely. They're very, very creamy. They give you no issues. These shimmers, there's a couple different textures. So like the really pigmented shimmer shades, this one and this one, they are foiled colors. So they're gonna give you like intense color payoff. And then the other shimmers are still gonna give you really nice color payoff too. And I really like this shade Uncovered, like taupey, purpley shades are some of my favorite kind of eyeshadow colors. This one's a little bit more pinkish too. And then going into like one of the foiled shadows, you're gonna get serious color payoff with that. So overall, the quality of this palette is pretty awesome. Like the mattes, the shimmers, and the foils, they all apply really, really nicely, like without any effort. What I would really want in this palette is a couple more matte shades. I like to use this a lot of times with my Too Faced Natural Matte palette just to deepen up my crease and just add a little bit more variety, because all in this first row you do get more like lighter tone mattes, and then you have some mattes up here that are more so like what I use for an outer corner just to like really deepen up an eye look, but I need some more like in between matte shade. That's the only thing that I'm missing in this palette, is like 2 more medium toned matte shades, and then this would be like a very complete palette to me because it has like all those shimmers that I really love. And then lastly, this is another influencer owned brand. This is the Latte palette from Kristen Dominique from Dominique Cosmetics. I just wiped this down with like 17 makeup wipes because mine gets so dirty. I've actually used this so much. So after cleaning it, this is like, it's still okay, it looks okay, but I really had to like scrub this palette down because I didn't want to show you guys how like gross it looked, because I use this palette so much. Like you'll see I have a pretty decent indent. This is one of my favorite shades, especially when I just like my go-to looks basically, or just like anytime I only have a couple minutes to do my makeup. Love this shade. And then I also just love all the matte shades in here. They're so pretty. I wish that the colorful shades in here, I wish these were actually shimmers, because sometimes just like having one pop of blue or something, I can't do like a full blue look or something. So I wish that these were shimmers in here, but I want to let you guys know that the quality of this palette is super amazing. This is one of my favorite neutral palettes in my collection. This is one of my favorite palettes of 2018 for sure. It's one of my like most used palettes. And I know a lot of people are hesitant on buying like influencer palettes when you could get like an Anastasia palette or like any other palette, like a Too Faced palette for like around the same price. But that's because this is just as good, if not better, than some of those. This one is $42 and it's a really, really awesome quality. It's available at Ulta. Highly recommend it. I think if you pick this up and you like the tones, like you really won't be disappointed because the quality is just awesome. This is like some of the shimmers and then the blue up here, but the shimmers are so good in this palette. They're like foiled shadows, and that really makes the palette to me like all 3 shimmers in here are worth it, and that's why I wish there was more shimmer. But I wanted to definitely bring this up because the Lemonade palette is coming out this month and I know it's going to be awesome. I love the color scheme of that palette almost more than this one, and I think together both of these palettes are going to be like really awesome, like my go-tos palettes that I'll use together. So if you guys are like on the fence about buying the Lemonade palette, just know that her original Latte palette is absolutely amazing. The quality is just awesome. It's like one of my most used go-to palettes for sure. Alright guys, so that is going to be everything for my comparison and roundup of all of my recent eyeshadow palettes in my collection. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I do have videos on basically all of these palettes, so that playlist will be in my description box. All the palettes that I mentioned will be listed in my description box too. Definitely let me know if you guys have tried these out. Let me know what your favorites are, what your least favorites are in the comments down below. And if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you guys soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.